Hi, this is R.L. Parker. I am a dark fantasy and epic fantasy author, and this channel is all about writing, the writing process. I might do story reviews of different things in media at some point. I will occasionally cover my novels, and I will talk about the writing process, story building that might relate to things for Dungeons and Dragons, or just, writing in general. So if any of that sounds interesting to you, subscribe and stick around. I'm sure that I'll have a lot more content going forward. For today's episode, I wanted to start with the first novel that I ever published. This is all about Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. I don't know why I'm stumbling over my words. Just so that we're clear, this is my first video, and I'm not used to having a mic and a camera in my face. So bear with me. This is the first printing of Bathed in the Blood of Ravens, and this is the reprint or second edition. And there were reasons for the changes in the cover and everything else that I'll go over in this. But just to start this off, for those of you not familiar with the novel, I'll read the back synopsis and then I'll go into a little bit more detail. Laurence had a happy childhood. He often dreamed of becoming a hero just like his father. Just as his dreams were about to become reality, tragedy struck. He soon learns that the attack on his family was only the beginning. The Kingdom of Arkhania is being torn apart through the machinations of an ancient being, and he is caught in their sinister plot. Ancient magic breathes life to forgotten evils, and with it, death follows. As the kingdom crumbles around him and threats appear at every turn, he must fight to save all he holds dear. Will he rise up and defeat his family's greatest foe? Will he save the kingdom from malevolent forces? Is he simply a pawn in a grander scheme which he cannot understand? So, to start with, the title itself, Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. So the primary title is just Blood of Ravens. That's how I usually refer to it. Bathed in the Blood of Ravens is referring to a specific thing, destiny. Destiny will be bathed in the blood of ravens. Laurence doesn't say on the back cover, but his last name is Ravencrest. It's one word. I know I pronounce it separately. I've always done that. I don't know why. But the etymology of his name is in this book in a conversation with his uncle, where it's revealed that he's a descendant of a person known as Gaul. He was a hero of old. He was actually half human and half Tor. I'll get into what a Tor is in a minute. He was very large, very strong, dark-skinned, and just a very powerful warrior. And when who would become the king of Arkhania, Archon Valen, when he wanted to try and unify all of the different lands into one kingdom, he needed an army, and one of the people that he relied upon to help him forge and lead that army is Gaul, who, thanks to his heroics prior to that, had learned how to ride a griffin under the training of the Aphir people, which is an elven nation. He was given a black griffin as his own griffin, so you have a dark-skinned man with dark leather armor and a black sword riding a black griffin. And when he would come down out of the sky to attack his enemies, he was seen as the Raven or the Death Raven. His story spread far and wide, all prehistory to this novel, so this is not in the novel, it's referenced in the novel. He became known as the Raven, and tales of the Raven spread across the land. When he finally married and started having children, his family was known as of House Raven, so they were of his house. And then through the generations, that became Ravencrest. So there we go. But that should tell you something about the title. So the title says, Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. Anyone descendant of the Raven is a Raven, and there are multiple of them. His destiny will be bathed in their blood. So that's what the title's alluding to. That's why I went with the blood smear on the first print and the very exquisitely hand-drawn Raven by a woman who goes by Charlotte Mallory online. I found her on Discord, paid her for the cover. I'm going to sneeze, maybe. Because I said it, I'm not going to. Anyways, paid for the cover art, compiled the cover and did the formatting myself. Formatted the novel myself. Don't know if it'll come in on the camera. Oh, that's a blank page. Duh, Rick. So you can see kind of the formatting. I believe this was in maybe 10-point font or something actually smaller than that. I think this was 9 or 9.5. And if you've done any Word document stuff in the past, you know that the default on most Word documents is like 12. So this is small. I did use the Laura font, which is free from Google. So it's a little bit more smooth to read, in my opinion, than something like Times New Roman would be. And I also took away all the space in between lines and paragraphs to scrunch all the text together as much as I could. And I pushed the margins out as far as the printer would let me push them out, all to get the page count down as much as I could. And this is a 454-page... It's not going to zoom. It's not going to do it. Whatever. You have to take my word for it. It's a 454-page novel in this format. Now that's critical when you look at the reprint or second edition or enhanced edition is what I've been calling it, because this one is a 610-page. Why? Well, I made it a little easier to read, especially for people with poor eyesight. It's not a massive font. It's not 12 pitch, but it's definitely on the gentler side on your eyes. There's also a little bit of a hair of a break between lines, but the font's bigger, the margins are about the same, but just changing the font size and adding one little short story at the end, which is only like 8 pages long, push this out to a much larger print for the same novel. The reason I did it was, well, I had to update the book anyways to include. I had to update the ISBN because of pricing changes at the printer. I had to update a whole, some other things like that. And I did another editing pass while I was at it. It wasn't traumatic. I just cleaned up some grammar here or there. Things that I noticed when I reread the first printing back to myself. And then because I had learned a lot, I also added some nice little tidbits to the formatting. At the beginning of every chapter, there's now the Raven. It's hard for me to get stuff on camera because I'm not used to it. So I added that. So there's a little graphic at the start of each chapter. At the bottom of every odd page, there's a timestamp for the world timeline, so that you can, once you learn it, you can keep track of how many days have passed between the first scene and this one, if you wanted to do that. Because I'm very nitpicky over my timeline. I have to be with some of the stories I tell. Point being, it's a better format overall, but it's also larger, and that makes it more expensive for people to buy. All that to say that was the major motivation for the formatting in the first one, which some people love, and some people have come back and said they couldn't read because the font was too small. But my motivation was to try and keep costs down, because self-publishing is very expensive. Not necessarily to me, it's expensive to the purchaser, because in order to put this in a store, I have to put up a wholesale discount. That means that I'm only earning like $1.52 per novel sold tops, and that's in a good time, right? When markets fluctuate, I might only earn 50 cents when you buy this copy of this book, but the store that's selling it to you is earning $8-9, and there's nothing I can do to make that cheaper. So my books are always priced the cheapest that I can. Back to the story of Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. It is a standalone story in a sense. It's part of a series. The rest of the series is currently being worked on. I'm writing book 2 whenever I'm not filming this or working on the day job or dealing with whatever around in real life. But I'm writing book 2 in this series right now. The story in Blood of Ravens is isolated to a point, meaning there is a main plot line that's unique to this book, and it does find resolution. But there are definitely little tidbits and subplots that pop up throughout the telling of the story that will carry over into the second book and beyond. There are also little pieces of details in here that I've expanded upon in my other novels, which are set before this in the world timeline. This happens in the year 113 of the second era of man. The first era of man starts at an event called the Grand Awakening, which I will maybe get into, we'll see. And then it carries forward for 1175 years to the founding of the Kingdom of Arkhania. and the founding of Kingdom of Arkhania is year 0 of the second era of man. So this takes place a little over 100 years into the second era. The king's been around for a little while now. We've had a couple kings come and go through, natural death and whatnot. And there are little plot points in here, little characters in here that I expand upon by going back in time with my other 2 novels. Now, that doesn't mean you have to read the other 2 novels, in any specific reading order. Some people enjoy them in chronological order. Some people have enjoyed them in release order. Either way works. Mix them up. Read them in literally any order you want, and you'll either have aha moments of, oh, that's what that was referring to, or you'll have a creeping growth through the stories of, I can't wait to see that payoff. Laurence himself, when he goes out on his journey of revenge, right? So he's trying to resolve this enemy that came back, that he discovers through the course of the story may have contributed to different deaths in his family going back in time. So he, sets off to seek, that final bit of training that he needs. He's been being trained in martial combat for, 7 years, almost actually longer than that. It's been a while since I read my own story. So about, let's say 10 years. So he's been training for a decade with a man who graduated from the school of Fel Rashan. And he is going off to join that school of Fel Rashan and live out his dreams when the story starts. He gets convinced by the events that happen in that moment to pursue that training kind of with a different mind. It's no longer about dreams and becoming a knight and achieving glory and coming back and sweeping a girl off her feet. It's now about, I have to shore up my training so that I can make sure I win this fight. And then along the way, you see him set off in his journey, and he collects friends. He collects, what start off as just co-students and become, fast comrades, and they get swept up in the kingdom politics because of Laurence's skill and his experience. He's clearly better trained and more well prepared than the other students at the school. The kingdom's legion is kind of, weak or in a shambles, depending on which part of it you look at. And the school is responsible for helping to investigate things that happen around, its local area. Well, Laurence gets swept up in those investigations because it turns out that some of the people he encountered along the way may have a hand in what's going on. That ends up in some pretty disastrous situations for the kingdom. Not Laurence's doing, it's just, he's caught up in an investigation of events that are leading somewhere. And they lead somewhere, whether or not he wants them to. He does help to recover some or prevent it from going too far. I'll leave that up to you to read. But then he decides at a point, I'm just going to go off and finish this. And he and his close friends take off and go to seek that final revenge. Meanwhile, his aunt and uncle, Garen and Lila Ravencrest, right after they hear what happened at the start of the book, to Laurence, they, bid him, please go to the school, don't seek your revenge. And then they set off on their own. So you end up with kind of two sides of the same story and a different approach to what needs to be done. Where you've got an aunt and uncle who adventured in their past but retired long ago to help raise Laurence, and now they are setting off to go and handle this to prevent their nephew from falling prey to this same man. Meanwhile, Laurence doesn't know that's happening, and he's off at school doing what he's doing to try and get there and accomplish the goal. And eventually the two parties collide, and it builds from there. I'd say the second half of this book actually has a few small, calm spots, but it's definitely a constant climb to that ultimate climax. And it's definitely got a satisfying end to the main plot. That isn't to say there isn't some little hook at the end of this that's going to piss some readers off and make people go, where's book 2? Because I've 100% gotten that feedback. Let's talk about female characters for a minute. I know there's a lot of hate in the community between readers and writers about men writing women. And I get that. I've seen some of the samples, and it's appalling. my female characters are people in my mind, just like any male character. They all have their own motivations, their own way of seeing the world, their own way of handling stress and love and hate and horror and tragedy and trauma. I don't go into writing a woman thinking, oh, I'm gonna make her fancy and pretty. No, that she's Kirlis in this novel. She's an elf woman that grew up in a pretty bad situation, right? Her mother died in childbirth to one of her siblings. Her father blamed her for not helping enough during the birthing process, abandoned them to the streets, got sucked into this weird tutelage orphanage situation, kind of rebelled and fought back against the societal norms where she was growing up, which isn't common over the whole world, but her one little elven village, if you were a woman, you were considered so precious to their reproductive process because it's so hard for that type of elf to reproduce that they were relegated to home life and more artistic pursuits. She wasn't like that. So she fought back and won her ability to be a warrior for her people and eventually became a griffin guard, basically a very powerful, skilled warrior who rides a griffin into combat, similar to Gaul. And she is assigned to the School of Fel Rashan as sort of the school's scout and guardian at a much higher level, right? It's not a student-based thing at that point. She's in the executive tier, if you will, above the school. But she gets swept up into the whole story. But like I never mention her breast size. I never talk about any of that stuff, right? She's a warrior. She's definitely has that strong woman vibe. And it's not your typical strong because she has a man to save her, or if I was to compare her to any character that I've seen in a movie, for example, she'd be closer to probably Ripley in Aliens or Sarah Connor in the first two Terminator movies, right? Not that she has the same motivations or the same drivers behind what she does, but she's got she's just a strong character, a strong person, right, at her core. And she knows how to respond to scenarios. And she's lived her whole life with people either A, trying to leverage her skill in combat, as a tool or a weapon, most of the times against her will, and trying to, take advantage of who she had, become, or B, being discredited by her own people because she was a woman and they see her as somebody that isn't doing what is best for their society, which would be reproducing. So she basically starts off the story as sort of an isolationist by choice, bulldozing her way through situations when combat is required, and everyone who knows of her reputation fears her. And there's a reason for that, and you get to see good examples of it in the story. But the more she gets to know Laurence and his family, the more she starts seeing the family life that she missed out on and becomes enamored with them and just the way that they are, how accepting they are of everyone around them, and the pure trust and respect and love between them that seems unconditional. And she's completely foreign to that. She doesn't understand that. So you do get to see a little bit more of her softer side come out in this, but it's definitely not. It's not who she is, right? She is a warrior first, and that is clear in this story. And then we look at Lila, another great example of a woman character. Now, anybody reading this will read through some of the scenes with Garen and Lila and their witty banter back and forth, the slight underhanded ridiculing of each other. That's that gentle light ribbing. That is, on our average and good days, that's me and my wife. That's how we communicate with each other. We tease each other kind of relentlessly at times. We can kind of feel each other out and know how we'll react in specific situations without even the need for a lot of communication. It's definitely evident when we play role-playing games together, like D&D back in the day, or we played World of Warcraft and Rift and other, MMORPGs together. We kind of just always knew what each other were doing. Well, Garen and Lila have that. That they also have just a deep love that you can feel. They're a good example of a healthy relationship. Not to say that they don't have problems that are behind the scenes of the books, or maybe they had arguments in the past, but they're just not a couple that argues constantly because they don't have need to. They don't have the motivational drivers that are forcing them to, and they've learned to deal with those situations in a healthier way, right? If Lila has something that she needs to say, Garen lets her get it off her chest, and then he'll make a witty remark and kind of come to her point, or counter in his own gentle way. And the same thing with if Garen needs to say something, then Lila will let him. But they are a good example of a healthy, marriage and what one really looks like. And I know that because I experience one. We do have our dark moments, everybody does, but for the most part, they are a good representation of my experience with a nice, healthy, loving relationship. And Lila is a very just open, accepting, loving woman. Meaning, if you've ever met those ladies that just seem to be a mom to all the kids in the neighborhood, and they take care of everybody, that's Lila, right? So now she was a cleric of Galroth, the god of justice, back in the day, and she is very fit in combat. She's a very good healer. She knows what she's doing. But she was quite happy, being in her mid-40s, sitting at home with her husband, tending a farm and casually raising their nephew, right? She had no interest in going back out into the field. Now that she is, you'll definitely see that she enjoys it. And there's a lot of, reminiscing of things that they did in their past. And I mean, it's not like exposition deep stuff. You just see hints of it, and you can kind of get the impression of that little glint and gleam in their eyes as they talk about things. But that's just yet another example of a woman in this story. Another one would be Ty Lee. That is Lawrence's childhood crush, if for lack of a better term. Now she's the only girl he ever had any attraction to before the story starts. He always daydreamed about marrying her, as young kids would when they meet at 6, 7 years old and kind of casually grow up seeing each other once or twice a week. And I'm sure almost every one of you had somebody that you pined over when you were young. Well, that's his Ty Lee, or that's who Ty Lee is for him. They do end up getting married very early on in the book because in his eyes, it's something that if he doesn't do now, he might not get a chance to do. So he does that. Now, Ty Lee, at that point in the story, right when it starts, she is a 17-year-old girl and growing up with very controlling parents. And by controlling, I mean that her dad is terrified something bad will happen to her, so he keeps her in their house most of the time. The only person she's allowed to leave the house with is her mom or Laurence, and Laurence only begrudgingly. She only gets to spend time with Laurence because she rebels if they don't let her. So over the years, they started letting her go off and spend time with Laurence more and more. But other than that, she's trapped at home reading books that are basically educational in some regard, or taking lessons from private tutors that they bring into their house, or just dealing with her mom. Meanwhile, her dad is off handling court issues in Mooncrest, the city that they all lived around. Now, what's not covered in the story is that Delriana, her mother, is actually the one that built their little financial empire and actually put her father into the situation that he was in to help run the town. She just decided that she was better suited to sitting behind the scenes and manipulating people by, playing at their, desires. If her husband Andor needs something done in court and he's got a guy that's being difficult on the vote, she'll go ply her trades and kind of poke and prod at his wife and the people around him to have them convince that husband to comply. So you've got a very strong woman from that sense in her mother who can manipulate people by kind of, applying those traits. You'll have to see. It's hard for me to explain without giving details away. And then you've got Andor, who is just political and shrewd, but way overprotective of his daughter. So through her youth, she learned that the only way she could experience what she termed as, fun or stress relief for herself, to make herself laugh and chuckle and give herself something funny to see and do, she would poke at her mom, right? Any way that she could get a rise out of her. Acting dumb, acting klutzy, being overdramatic for the sense of, it's almost if you if you took your typical young YouTuber and dropped them in a medieval world and how they would behave without even a camera in their face. That's kind of how I pictured her. But I also, I saw girls acting that way when I was a kid and just being overdramatic just for the sake of getting attention. That's how Ty Lee starts this story, because she hasn't had any other recourse, right? She hasn't had anything else in her life that gave her joy in her mind. So when we start the story, she's definitely very juvenile. My wife hated her character when the story started. She was like, she better not stay this way. I'm like, you need to read further, dear. You need to read further. There's reasons and motivations for everything with Ty Lee. Ty Lee does not finish the story that way. She finished the story one of my wife's favorite characters. Her personal growth is probably the most dramatic in the entire novel. But she definitely ends the story as a strong woman in her own right. She's not running into combat or any of that, but she had the most growing to do. It's not that I wasn't capable of giving everybody else a strong growth arc. She was just the only one that really needed it. But again, another example of two strong women there, Ty Lee and Delriana. One starts that way and stays that way, and the other one grows into that by her circumstances and the way she chooses to respond to things. But again, back to the typical man writing a woman, not a mention of cup size in the whole book or series. There never will be. It's not me. I'm not objectifying the women that I'm writing. They're real people. So I think that's enough about the overall story of Bathed in the Blood of Ravens and what you can get out of it. It is an epic fantasy tale because it's large and sweeping with a big cast, and it definitely speaks to a grander thing that's going on. But it's got a very serious dark note. I would almost have called this dark fantasy before I published it. To those that are unfamiliar with the term dark fantasy and what it really means, in my mind, which is what's important in my, to me calling it this, in my mind, dark fantasy is just fantasy with very little hope for the characters, right? It's a dark situation that they get stuck in where there's not a lot of ways out, not a lot of successful ways to handle the situation, lots of consequences, right? No big sweeping, hand of God coming to save people, no deus ex machinas coming in to save the day at the last minute. If they don't build their way to it, they don't make it through it. So that is Bathed in the Blood of Ravens. Tune into the next episode to find out more about Sissy, the second novel that I published. All right. Like and subscribe. Hope to see you again.